The greenhouse door had been locked for 3 years. Ruth never gave me the key. I always thought it was her private space, her little world of glass and green. But the morning I found bulldozers parked on her garden, a man I had never met handed me that key and said, "Your wife told me you would need this someday." What waited inside was not plants. It was proof, and it destroyed every person who thought they could erase her. But let me start from the beginning. Because you need to understand what that garden meant before you can understand what they tried to take. My name is Henry Porter. I am 70 years old, and I live in a house on the edge of Asheville, North Carolina, where the Blue Ridge Mountains turn purple at dusk, and the air smells like wood smoke and wild thyme. I spent my life as a landscape architect, drawing gardens for other people. But the only garden that ever mattered was the one my wife Ruth planted behind our house. 2 acres of earth she turned into a living cathedral. Rosemary along the stone path, lavender in thick rows by the fence, chamomile near the kitchen window, because she said it helped her think. Every plant had a name, not the Latin kind, though she knew those too, but personal names. She called the big magnolia near the shed Eleanor, after her mother. The row of basil by the greenhouse door she called the choir, because when the wind passed through them, she swore they hummed. Ruth was a pharmacist by trade, but a healer by nature. She spent 30 years developing herbal remedies, testing compounds, writing papers that sat in university libraries collecting dust. She also embroidered. Beautiful, intricate patterns she stitched into cloth, the way she stitched kindness into every life she touched. She was the kind of woman who made the world wider just by standing in it. She died 3 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Quiet and steady, the way she did everything. She did not scream or rage against it. She organized her spice drawer, labeled her seed jars, watered the garden one last time, and asked me to promise I would keep it alive. I promised, and every morning since, I have walked barefoot through that garden at dawn, touched the rosemary, whispered good morning to Eleanor the magnolia, and pretended that Ruth was still somewhere nearby, maybe just inside the greenhouse, mixing something that smelled like eucalyptus and hope. The greenhouse sat in the center of the garden like a glass heart. Ruth built it herself 15 years ago, with salvaged windows and old copper pipes. She spent hours in there, sometimes entire afternoons, and when she came out her hands would smell like soil and lavender and something faintly metallic I could never place. She kept it locked. Always. I asked her once why, and she smiled that half smile she wore when she knew something I did not. "It is my project, Henry," she said. "You will see it when the time is right." I never pressed her. That was our way. She had her secrets, and I had my trust. The morning everything shattered. I woke before the sun. The air was heavy, that soft spring humidity that clings to the mountains like a second skin. I made coffee the way Ruth taught me, strong with a pinch of cinnamon, and stepped outside to begin my ritual. But something was wrong. I felt it before I saw it. A low rumble beneath the birdsong, mechanical, foreign, like a growl trapped underground. I set down my mug on the porch railing and walked toward the garden, my bare feet pressing into the cool, damp grass. Then I saw them, 2 bulldozers parked at the edge of the property, their steel blades catching the first light of morning. Yellow machines on green earth, grotesque and still, like predators waiting for permission. Beside them, a line of orange stakes had been driven into the ground, marking a path straight through the center of Ruth's garden. My heart lurched. I ran. The stones of the garden path bit into my feet, but I did not care. I reached the first row of lavender and stopped. Some of it had already been torn. Clumps of purple and root lay scattered on the dirt, like casualties of a war no one had declared. I stood there, my breath ragged, staring at the destruction, and for a moment the world tilted. This was not possible. This was Ruth's ground, Ruth's air, Ruth's life pressed into soil and stem and bloom. I turned and walked back to the house. My hands were shaking, but my jaw was set. Through the kitchen door, down the hallway, into the living room where the smell of expensive perfume hit me before I even saw her. Stephanie sat on the couch, legs crossed, phone in hand, scrolling with the calm of someone who had already won. My son Marcus stood near the window, arms folded, staring at the floor. "What have you done?" I said. Stephanie looked up. Her smile was polished, practiced, the kind of smile people wear when they have rehearsed cruelty until it looks like courtesy. "Oh, good morning, Henry. You are up early. What have you done to the garden?" She set her phone down slowly, deliberately, as if I had interrupted something important. "I sold the land," she said. "My father's development company is building luxury condominiums. It is a prime location, Henry. Mountain views, walking distance to downtown. The deal was finalized last week." The words entered my ears, but my brain refused to process them. Sold. The land. Ruth's land. Luxury condominiums. "You had no right," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Marcus shifted by the window but said nothing. Stephanie tilted her head. That gesture she used when she wanted to appear sympathetic, but could not be bothered to feel it. "Henry," she said, "Ruth has been gone for 3 years. That garden is just dirt and weeds now. Nobody visits it. Nobody benefits from it. My parents have been dreaming of their Paris trip for years, and the down payment from the land sale made it possible. You should be happy we are finally putting this property to good use." I stared at her, searching for some flicker of awareness, some hint that she understood what she had done. There was none. She was just a pharmacist who played in the dirt. Stephanie continued, examining her nails. "Get over it, Henry. People move on. You should try it." The air left my lungs like someone had pressed a hand against my chest. I looked at Marcus, my son, the boy who used to kneel beside Ruth in the garden every summer, hands black with earth, laughing when she told him the basil was singing. The boy who once said this garden is where Mom keeps her heart. He would not meet my eyes. Marcus finally spoke. His voice came out thin and cracked, like a branch that had been bent too far. "Dad, it is not that simple. The property taxes have been climbing. Stephanie and I talked about it, and we thought this was the best move for everyone." "Everyone," I repeated. The word tasted like rust. "You mean everyone except your mother?" He flinched. A tightening around his jaw, a drop in his shoulders, the posture of a man shaped entirely by someone else's decisions. But he did not correct himself. He did not apologize. Stephanie watched us with the calm detachment of a spectator at a game she had already won. "The construction crew starts grading tomorrow," she said without looking up from her phone. "You might want to clear anything sentimental from the shed." Anything sentimental. As if 30 years of Ruth's life could be boxed up in an afternoon. I left the room without another word. My throat burned, but I refused to let them see me break. Ruth always said, "Never let cruelty see your tears, Henry. It feeds on them." I walked back into the garden. The bulldozers still crouched at the property line like yellow scars on green skin. But beyond them, the parts they had not yet reached were still breathing. Rosemary stood tall. Lavender swayed gently. Eleanor the magnolia held her branches wide, as if trying to shelter everything beneath her. I knelt at the center of the garden and pressed both hands into the soil the way Ruth used to. Fingers spread, palms flat, listening for a heartbeat underneath. "Ruth," I whispered, "they are taking everything you built." The wind stirred through the basil. The choir hummed. No answer came. I do not know how long I knelt there. The world blurred into birdsong and distant traffic and sunlight warming my neck. I felt hollowed out, scooped clean of everything that kept me upright. Then I heard footsteps. Not from the house. From the bulldozers. Heavy boots on soft earth, slow and careful. I did not turn around. "Mr. Porter." The voice was deep, quiet. The kind that carries weight without raising volume. I turned. A man stood at the edge of the rosemary bed. Tall, broad-shouldered, maybe mid-50s, with dark skin weathered by decades of outdoor work. His boots were caked in red Appalachian clay. His hands hung at his sides, scarred and uncertain. He wore a faded green jacket with a patch that read, Asheville Earth Works. His eyes held something I did not expect, from a man standing beside a machine designed to destroy. They held sorrow. Mr. Porter, he said again, your wife said you would come. My wife has been dead for 3 years, I managed. He nodded slowly. I know, sir. She told me that too. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small brass key on a strip of worn leather. He held it toward me gently, the way someone holds a candle in a dark room. She gave me this, he said. Told me to keep it safe until someone tried to take the garden. Then I was to find you and hand you this key, and tell you to go into the greenhouse. Who are you? I asked. My name is Elijah Ward. Your wife saved my life. He glanced at the rosemary between us and drew a slow breath. 15 years ago, I walked out of Coleman Federal Correctional after 8 years for armed robbery. $11 in my pocket, a garbage bag of clothes, and nobody waiting on the other side. His voice was steady, worn smooth by repetition, a story he had told himself enough times to keep it from shaking. I ended up sleeping behind the hardware store on Patton Avenue. Could not get work, could not get housing. Then one morning, a woman walked up to me with a thermos of coffee and a pair of gardening gloves. She said, Can you dig a hole? I said yes, ma'am, though I had never held a shovel for anything honest. She smiled and said, Then come with me. I have a garden that needs help. My chest tightened. I could see Ruth doing exactly that, kneeling in the dirt with a stranger, treating him like family before he had earned it, because she believed everyone deserved a place to grow. She did not ask what I had done, Elijah continued. She handed me a trowel, pointed to a bare patch of earth, and said, This one is called Elijah. I am naming it after you. She taught me every plant in this garden, paid me when she had no reason to, helped me get my contractor license. When I started my own company, she was my first reference. He looked toward the greenhouse, its glass walls catching morning light. About 6 months before she passed, she called me over. She was thinner by then, slower, but her eyes were exactly the same. She handed me this key and said, Elijah, one day someone will try to destroy this garden. When that happens, find Henry, give him this. Tell him to go inside the greenhouse. Everything he needs is there. I took the key from his hand. The brass was warm, smoothed by years of holding. Small and ordinary, the kind that might open a music box or a diary. Yet it felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. She told me one more thing, he said softly. She said, Tell him every root remembers where it began. He will know what it means. I closed my fingers around the key. The metal pressed into my palm like a second heartbeat. I looked past Elijah, past the bulldozers and the orange stakes and the torn lavender, toward the greenhouse. It stood where it always had, glass walls clouded with dew, door shut, patient. For 3 years I had walked past it every morning. For 3 years I had wondered what Ruth kept behind that door. Now the key rested in my hand. And Ruth, even from the far side of everything, was still one step ahead. The lock resisted at first. 3 years of mountain humidity had swollen the metal, and the key stuttered against the rust before catching. I turned it slowly. The mechanism groaned once, then gave way with a click that sounded almost alive. Elijah stood behind me, silent, respectful, his hands clasped in front of him. I pushed the door open. The hinges whispered, and the air that rushed out carried the scent of dried lavender, damp earth, and something faintly sweet, like old paper left in sunlight. I stepped inside. The greenhouse was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just built it larger in my imagination, over 3 years of wondering. Sunlight poured through the glass panels above, catching dust motes that floated like tiny planets in the stillness. The copper pipes Ruth had salvaged glowed faintly green with patina. Along the left wall, a wooden workbench stretched the full length of the space. Glass jars lined the shelves above it, each labeled in Ruth's careful handwriting. Chamomile, 80 milligrams. Echinacea root, dried, October batch. Lavender tincture, batch 14. They were organized with the precision of a pharmacist and the tenderness of someone who loved every ingredient the way a mother loves her children. Dried herb bundles hung from the ceiling on thin twine, casting delicate shadows across the floor. A small stool sat beside the bench, its seat worn smooth from years of use. I could picture her there, perched with her back straight, grinding something in her mortar while humming a hymn she never remembered the words to. On the far wall, pinned to a corkboard, were sketches. Botanical drawings in pencil and ink, each one detailed enough to belong in a textbook. Beside them, a framed photograph of the two of us standing in the garden the summer we finished planting the lavender rose. We were both sunburned and laughing. I touched the glass with my fingertip. "You kept this in here," I murmured. "Not in the house. In here." Elijah spoke from the doorway. "She told me this was her real home," he said quietly. "She said the house was where she lived, but the greenhouse was where she thought." I let that settle over me like a warm cloth. Then I looked down. The floor was paved with old terracotta tiles, rust-colored and uneven, the kind you find in Appalachian farmhouses from the last century. Ruth had laid them herself. I remembered watching her tap each one into place with a rubber mallet. Humming. Patient. Refusing help. But one tile near the center was different. Slightly darker. Slightly newer. Its edges did not match the others, as though it had been lifted and replaced more than once. I knelt beside it and ran my fingers along the seam. There was a gap, barely visible, where the grout had been carefully removed and smoothed over. "Elijah," I said, "do you have a flathead on you?" He reached into his jacket and handed me a small screwdriver without a word. I worked the blade into the gap and pried gently. The tile lifted with a soft sucking sound, releasing a breath of cool, earthy air from below. Beneath it was a shallow cavity lined with plastic sheeting to keep out moisture. And inside that cavity sat a metal box, roughly the size of a shoebox, painted dark green and sealed with a combination lock. My hands trembled as I lifted it out. It was heavier than it looked. Solid. Deliberate. Built to protect whatever was inside from time and water and the carelessness of the world above. I set it on the workbench and stared at the lock. 4 digits. I tried our wedding anniversary. June 7th, 1978. 0607. The lock popped open on the first try. Of course it did. Ruth always said our wedding date was the only number worth remembering. I lifted the lid. The hinges were stiff, but they held. Inside, the contents were arranged with the same meticulous care Ruth brought to everything she touched. On top lay a thick stack of documents bound with a rubber band. Legal paper, dense with typed text and handwritten annotations in the margins. Ruth's handwriting. Beneath the documents sat a manila envelope. Sealed. With my name written across the front in her looping script. Below that, a small album wrapped in cloth, its cover embroidered with tiny blue flowers, the kind Ruth used to stitch on winter evenings by the fire, and at the very bottom, wrapped in a silk handkerchief she had made herself, a small digital voice recorder, the kind you buy at an office supply store, plain and functional, nothing elegant about it except the care with which she had protected it. I picked up the documents first. The top page was a cover letter from a law firm I did not recognize, addressed to Ruth, dated 14 months before she died. The words blurred at first, then sharpened as my eyes adjusted. Irrevocable trust. Beneficiary: Henry James Porter. Total estimated value: $3.2 million. I read the number twice. Then a third time. 3.2 million. Ruth had never mentioned anything close to that amount. We lived simply. She drove a 12-year-old sedan. She bought her seeds in bulk and mended her own clothes. I turned to the next page. The trust was funded by several sources: royalties from 3 pharmaceutical patents for herbal compounds she had developed, investment returns from a portfolio she had managed quietly for over a decade, revenue from licensing agreements with 2 universities. She had built an empire in silence, root by root. The same way she built her garden, my fingers found the voice recorder. I unwrapped the silk handkerchief carefully. The fabric still smelled faintly of her. Lavender and something warmer beneath it, like bread rising in a kitchen on a cold morning. I held the recorder in my palm. It was light, no bigger than my thumb. A single red button on its face. I looked at Elijah. He nodded once. Gently, I pressed play, and Ruth's voice filled the greenhouse like sunlight breaking through glass. "Henry," she began, "if you are hearing this, then someone has come for the garden. I am sorry, my love. I hoped I was wrong about them, but I have watched too carefully to pretend anymore." Her voice was steady, warm, unhurried. The same voice that used to read recipes aloud while cooking, that hummed hymns off key in the shower, that whispered goodnight against my shoulder every evening for 42 years. Hearing it now, in this glass room she had built with her own hands, felt like standing inside a memory that refused to die. "I want you to listen carefully," she continued. "Do not rush. Do not act out of anger. Anger is a weed, Henry. It grows fast, but it poisons everything around it. What I have left you is not a weapon. It is a garden. And like all gardens, it needs patience." I leaned against the workbench. My legs felt uncertain beneath me. Elijah had stepped outside without being asked, giving me privacy with a gentleness that said more about Ruth's influence on him than any words could. 2 years before I recorded this, Ruth said, "I woke up at 3 in the morning because I heard the printer running in your office. I went downstairs and found Stephanie copying our property deed, the tax records, and your medical insurance documents. She did not see me. I stood in the hallway and watched her for 11 minutes. My stomach turned. 2 years before Ruth died. That meant Stephanie had been planning this while Ruth was still alive. Still cooking dinner for all of us. Still smiling across the Thanksgiving table. I did not confront her," Ruth continued. "Confrontation would have warned her. Instead, I began to prepare. I contacted a lawyer. I restructured our finances. I moved everything of value into a trust that cannot be touched without your direct consent. The documents in front of you explain the details. $3.2 million, Henry. I know that surprises you. You always thought we were comfortable, but modest." She paused. I could hear her take a breath, slow and deliberate, the way she breathed when she was choosing her next words like seeds, placing each one exactly where it needed to go. "The money came from my work. 3 patents I filed over the past 15 years for herbal compounds, 1 for inflammation, 1 for anxiety, 1 for chronic pain. The universities licensed them quietly. I never told you because I wanted to protect it. Money changes people, Henry. I have seen it turn kindness into suspicion and love into arithmetic. I did not want that for us." I closed my eyes. All those years she spent in this greenhouse, mixing and measuring and writing in her notebooks. I thought she was tending herbs. She was building a fortress. "Now listen," she said, and her voice shifted slightly. Still warm, but with an edge beneath it. "The way a rose has thorns you do not notice until you grip too tight. Stephanie is not acting alone. Her father, Victor, is a developer. He has been eyeing our land for years, not just for the property, but for what grows on it. My patents, my formulas. The compounds I developed are worth more than the soil they grew from. Stephanie knows this. She married Marcus to get close to it." The words hit me like stones dropped into still water, each one sending ripples I could not stop. "I need you to understand something," Ruth continued. "I do not blame Marcus. He is weak. Yes, but weakness is not the same as wickedness. She found the crack in him, and she pressed until it opened. When the time comes, and it will, be angry at what was done to him, not at who he became because of it. That was Ruth. Even in her warning, she left room for mercy. Now, she said, here is what I need you to do. In the album beside the recorder, you will find photographs. Each one is a person I helped over the years. I gave them a piece of this story to hold, a document, a recording, a medical file. They do not know each other. They only know me. And they each made me a promise. I reached for the album. The embroidered cover was soft beneath my fingers, blue flowers stitched in thread so fine it looked like watercolor. I opened it carefully. The first page held a photograph, slightly faded, of a young woman sitting on a riverbank. Her knees were pulled to her chest. Her hair hung across her face. She was not looking at the camera. She was looking at the water with the hollow stillness of someone measuring the distance between breath and surrender. Beneath the photograph, in Ruth's handwriting, were the words, Grace, the one who almost did not make it. On the opposite page, Ruth had written a short note. Grace Nguyen, attorney. I found her on the riverbank behind the hospital the night she lost her daughter. She was going to step in. I sat beside her for 4 hours until the sun came up. I helped her rebuild her practice. She holds a copy of the real will and my instructions for the trust. I turned the page. The next photograph showed a man in a white coat standing in front of a small clinic, its sign written in both English and Vietnamese. Ruth stood beside him, both of them smiling, a basket of dried herbs between them. Dr. Pham, the note read. I helped him open a free clinic for the immigrant community when no bank would lend to him. He holds Henry's true medical records and proof that no outside physician has ever examined him. The next page. A woman in her 40s, dark hair tied back, sitting at a desk covered in papers. Cora Bellingham, investigative journalist. Her daughter had a rare autoimmune condition. I treated her with a compound I developed when conventional medicine failed. She has been investigating Victor's company for 2 years at my request. I turned one more page. An older woman, silver-haired, standing in a garden of her own, holding a jar of something golden. Martha Callahan, age 76. Chronic rheumatoid arthritis. Doctor said untreatable. My compound gave her back her hands. She knows the true value of the patents. Stephanie tried to silence her. I closed the album slowly. 4 people. 4 lives. Ruth had touched, healed, rescued. 4 promises made to a woman who planned for everything, including the possibility that love alone would not be enough to protect the people she left behind. I planted people the way I planted herbs. Henry, Ruth's voice said from the recorder, still playing softly beside me. Each one grows in its own time. When you need them, they will be there. I sat in the greenhouse until the sunlight shifted from gold to amber. The recorder had gone silent. Ruth's voice was gone again, pulled back into whatever place voices go when they finish saying what matters. But her words remained, layered into the air like pollen, settling on everything they touched. I looked down at the album in my lap, at the faces of strangers who were not strangers at all. They were seeds Ruth had planted across years and miles, each one waiting for the season she had already foreseen. I opened the album once more to the first page. Grace, the one who almost did not make it. And beneath that, in smaller letters I had missed before, Ruth had added one final line. Start with her, Henry. She has been waiting. I did not go to Grace first. I know Ruth told me to. But there was something I needed to do before I could begin following her map. I needed to look them in the eye one more time. Not to beg, not to shout, just to see if there was anything left in my son worth saving. The next evening I drove to Marcus's house. The Blue Ridge Mountains were bruised purple against a darkening sky, and the air coming through my truck window carried the scent of coming rain. The folder from Ruth's vault sat on the passenger seat beside me, but I did not bring it inside. Not yet. Tonight was not about evidence. Tonight was about faces. Their house sat at the end of a quiet street lined with dogwoods. The porch light was on. Through the front window, I could see the dining room table set for 4, not 3. Company. I knocked. Marcus opened the door. His face cycled through surprise, guilt, and something close to fear before settling into the careful blankness he wore when Stephanie was nearby. "Dad," he said. "We were not expecting you." "I know," I said. "I need to talk." He hesitated, then stepped aside. The house smelled of roasted garlic and white wine, warm and domestic, the kind of smell designed to make everything feel normal. But nothing about this house had felt normal to me since Stephanie moved in. In the dining room, 2 people I recognized sat at the table. Victor Hargrove, Stephanie's father, and her mother Diane. Victor was a large man, with silver hair combed straight back. The kind of man who filled a room not with presence, but with pressure. He wore a dark blazer over an open-collar shirt, casual in the way wealthy men perform casualness. Diane sat beside him, thin and angular, her smile fixed like something painted on porcelain. Stephanie stood near the kitchen doorway, wineglass in hand, watching me the way a cat watches a bird it has already decided is too slow to escape. "Robert," Victor said, rising slightly from his chair with a handshake I did not accept. He corrected himself. "Henry. Forgive me. Good to see you." "I doubt that," I said. The room tightened. Marcus closed the front door behind me and hovered near the hallway, neither sitting nor leaving. A man caught between walls. "I came to talk about the garden," I said. Stephanie sighed audibly. "Henry, we have been over this. The land was underutilized. My father's company is building something that will benefit the entire community. You should be thanking us." I looked at her steadily. "Thanking you for selling land that belonged to my wife. Land you had no legal right to touch." Victor leaned back in his chair, fingers laced across his stomach. "Now hold on," he said, his voice carrying the oiled smoothness of a man who negotiated for a living. "That property was jointly held. Marcus is co-owner. He signed the transfer documents willingly. Everything was done above board." "Was it?" I said quietly. Victor's smile did not waver, but something behind his eyes shifted. A flicker. A calculation. He was measuring me, deciding how much I knew. "Henry." Diane spoke for the first time, her voice thin and sweet like artificial sugar. "We understand this is emotional for you. Losing Ruth was hard on all of us, but clinging to a patch of weeds is not honoring her memory. It is stalling your life. A patch of weeds." Ruth had spent 30 years cultivating that garden. She had cataloged over 200 species of medicinal herbs. She had developed pharmaceutical compounds that universities paid to license. And this woman, who had never knelt in soil a day in her life, called it weeds. I turned to Marcus. He stood near the hallway entrance, arms crossed, jaw tight. His eyes met mine for half a second before dropping to the floor. "Son," I said. "Do you have anything to say?" He opened his mouth. I saw the words begin to form, saw his chest rise with the breath needed to carry them. Then Stephanie's hand landed on his arm. Light, brief, a touch so casual it could have meant anything, but I saw the way his body responded, the way his shoulders pulled inward, the way the half-formed words dissolved on his tongue. "Marcus is fine with the decision," Stephanie said smoothly. "We discussed it thoroughly. He understands that progress requires letting go of the past." "Progress," I repeated. "Is that what you call it?" Victor stood now, buttoning his blazer with one hand, a gesture meant to signal authority. "Mr. Porter," he said, his tone shifting from friendly to firm, "you are an old man living alone in a house that is too big for you. Tending a garden nobody visits. We are offering your family a future. I suggest you accept that gracefully." The room was silent. Rain had begun to tap against the windows, soft and rhythmic, as if the sky were counting down to something. I looked at each of them in turn. Diane with her painted smile, Victor with his polished threats, Stephanie with her wine and her certainty, and Marcus, my boy, standing in the corner of his own home like a guest who had overstayed his welcome. Ruth used to say that people reveal themselves not in what they do but in what they assume they can get away with. Looking at these four faces, I understood exactly what she meant. I walked toward the door. My hand found the knob. I turned it halfway, then stopped. My wife, I said without turning around, understood more than any of you will ever know. And she left proof. The silence behind me was absolute. I could feel it pressing against my back, like a held breath. Stephanie's voice cut through it, sharp and quick. "Is that a threat, Henry?" "No," I said. "It is a promise." I stepped out into the rain. The cool air hit my face and I breathed it in, letting it wash the scent of garlic and perfume and dishonesty from my lungs. The truck waited in the driveway, patient as always. I climbed in, closed the door, and sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel. My heart was hammering, but my mind was still. Ruth's voice moved through me like a current, calm and certain. "Do not fight with anger. Fight with truth." I reached for the album on the passenger seat and opened it to the first page. Grace Nguyen stared back at me from the photograph, a young woman on a riverbank, balanced between surrender and survival. "Start with her," Ruth had written. I turned the key in the ignition, pulled out of the driveway, and headed toward downtown Asheville. The rain streaked across the windshield like tears the sky had been saving, and behind me the mountains disappeared into the dark. Grace Nguyen's office was on the second floor of a brick building on Lexington Avenue, above a used bookstore that smelled of old paper and pipe tobacco. There was no gold lettering on the door, no marble lobby, just a frosted glass panel with her name printed in small, clean letters and a potted fern on the windowsill that looked like it had survived more than a few winters. I found her name in Ruth's album and searched for her online the night before. Her practice was small, focused on estate law and elder advocacy. Her website had no flashy graphics, just a photograph of a woman with sharp dark eyes and a quote beneath it. "Justice grows slowly, but it grows." I did not call ahead. Some things deserve the weight of a face, not a voice through a phone. I climbed the stairs, knocked, and waited. The door opened. Grace Nguyen was smaller than I expected, barely reaching my shoulder, with black hair pulled back in a low knot and reading glasses perched on her forehead. She wore a gray cardigan over a white blouse, and her office behind her was filled with sunlight, books, and green plants lining every surface. Ruth would have loved this room. Grace looked at me for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes. Recognition not of my face, but of the moment itself, as if she had rehearsed this meeting in her mind and was now watching it arrive. "You are Henry," she said. "I am." She stepped aside. "Come in. I have been waiting for you." The words echoed what Elijah had said. "Your wife told me you would come." Ruth had seeded these encounters years in advance, planting people the way she planted chamomile, trusting them to bloom at the right time. Grace motioned me to a chair beside her desk. She sat across from me, hands folded, steady. Her office was warm, but her eyes were sharper than the room suggested. This was not a woman who softened the truth. "Ruth told me you would show up when the garden was in danger," she said. "I did not know when, but she made me promise to be ready." "How did you know her?" I asked. Grace was silent for a few seconds. Then she spoke, and her voice dropped to a register that carried the particular heaviness of something long buried. 12 years ago, I lost my daughter. She was 4. Meningitis. It happened so fast the doctors could not keep up. I buried her on a Tuesday, and by Thursday, I had lost the ability to see the point of anything. She paused, adjusting her glasses, though they did not need adjusting. I was also in the middle of a malpractice case. My client's family accused me of negligence. The Bar Association opened an investigation. I lost my license temporarily, lost my apartment, lost every reason I had ever built to keep standing. She met my eyes. One night, I walked down to the French Broad River behind the hospital. I sat on the bank, and I looked at the water for a very long time. I was not thinking about swimming. My chest tightened. I pictured the photograph in Ruth's album. The young woman on the riverbank, knees to her chest, staring at the current. Ruth found me, Grace said. I do not know how she knew I was there. She sat beside me on the wet grass and did not say a single word for 4 hours. She just stayed. When the sun came up, she handed me a thermos of coffee and said, "The river will be here tomorrow, but you do not have to be in it." She smiled faintly. That was the beginning. Ruth helped me get my license reinstated. She connected me with a therapist. She brought me herbs that helped me sleep for the first time in months. And when I reopened my practice, she sent me my first 3 clients. She leaned forward. "Henry, your wife did not just save my life. She rebuilt it from the ground up. And she told me that one day I would have the chance to do the same for you." Grace opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. She laid it on the desk between us. Ruth gave me this 14 months before she passed. It contains a copy of her real will, the trust documents, and instructions for how to protect your assets if anyone tried to challenge your competency. She flipped to a specific page and turned it toward me. "Have you seen this before?" I looked down. It was a medical evaluation form, dated 8 months ago. My name was at the top. Beneath it, a series of checkboxes marked with clinical terms. Severe cognitive decline, inability to manage personal affairs, recommendation for legal guardianship transfer. At the bottom, a signature. Dr. Alan Whitfield. "I have never met a Dr. Whitfield," I said slowly. "I know," Grace replied, "because he has never set foot in Asheville. He practices in Raleigh. And according to state records, his medical license was suspended once before for signing fraudulent evaluations." She turned another page. "His name also appears in Victor Hargrove's college alumni directory. Class of 1982. Roommates." The room tilted slightly. I gripped the armrest of my chair. "They did not just steal your land, Henry," Grace said, her voice low and precise. "They tried to steal you. This document was filed with the county 3 months ago. If it had gone unchallenged, Stephanie and Victor would have gained legal control over your finances, your property, and your medical decisions. They were going to declare you incompetent and take everything." I stared at the form. My name, my supposed diagnosis. A doctor I had never met, paid by a man who wanted my wife's garden turned into concrete. "This is elder abuse," Grace continued. "Criminal fraud, forgery." And Ruth saw it coming. She closed the folder and placed both hands flat on its surface. "She left me the real will, Henry. Notarized, witnessed, filed with a separate attorney in Charleston as a safeguard. It supersedes anything Stephanie may have fabricated, and it contains a clause Ruth wrote herself." Grace looked at me. "If any asset tied to this trust is sold, transferred, or misused without the direct written consent of Henry James Porter, full ownership of all trust assets reverts immediately and irrevocably to the surviving spouse." The words landed like anchors. Ruth had not just planned for the possibility of betrayal. She had built a legal wall around me, brick by brick, while I slept. "What do we do now?" I asked. Grace stood, walked to her window, and looked out at the rain still falling across Lexington Avenue. "Now we gather the rest of what she left behind. Dr. Pham has your real medical records. Cora Bellingham has been building a case against Victor for 2 years. And Martha Callahan knows exactly what those patents are worth." She turned back to me. "Ruth planted all of us, Henry. And the season she planned for has finally arrived." The clinic sat on a side street off Haywood Road in West Asheville, tucked between a laundromat and a tire shop. The sign above the door read Pham Community Health Center in blue letters. And below it, the same words in Vietnamese. A hand-painted mural covered the wall beside the entrance, bright flowers winding around the silhouettes of people holding hands. I parked across the street and sat for a moment. Through the front window I could see the waiting room, nearly full. An elderly couple sharing a bench, a young mother bouncing a toddler on her knee, a teenager with headphones staring at the ceiling. The room was small and plain, but there was something alive about it. Something that reminded me of the way Ruth's garden felt on a good morning. Crowded with purpose. Grace had called ahead. When I walked in, the receptionist smiled and said, "Dr. Pham is expecting you. Mr. Porter, please, come through." She led me down a narrow hallway lined with framed photographs. Patients at health fairs. Children holding toothbrushes. Community picnics in the park. And in nearly every frame, somewhere near the edge or the background, I saw traces of Ruth. A basket of dried herbs on a table. A hand-lettered sign that read, "Healing begins with kindness." A vase of lavender on a windowsill. She was everywhere in this building, woven into its walls like thread and cloth. Dr. Pham met me at the end of the hallway. He was a compact man in his late 50s, with close-cropped gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. His handshake was firm but unhurried, the grip of someone who had learned to measure everything carefully. "Mr. Porter," he said, "I have thought about this day many times. Please sit down." His office was small, functional, and clean. A single window looked out onto a garden behind the building. Herbs planted in neat rows between wooden frames. I recognized the layout immediately. Ruth had designed it. "She helped you build that," I said, nodding toward the window. He followed my gaze and smiled. "She designed it, funded the first 2 years of supplies, and came every Saturday to teach my patients how to grow their own remedies. She said medicine without roots is just chemistry." That sounded exactly like her. I sat in the chair across from his desk. "Dr. Pham," I said, "Grace Wynn told me you hold something important. My real medical records." He nodded, his expression shifting from warm to serious. "I do. Ruth brought them to me 18 months before she passed. She said there might come a day when someone would try to claim you were not sound of mind. She wanted a physician who had actually examined you to be ready to testify otherwise." He opened a drawer and pulled out a folder. Thinner than Grace's, but just as deliberate. "I have examined you twice," he said. "Once when Ruth brought you here for what she called a routine checkup, and once 6 months after her passing when you came in for joint pain. Both times your cognitive function was excellent. Sharp memory, clear reasoning, appropriate emotional responses. I documented everything in detail." He turned the folder toward me. The pages inside were covered in careful medical notation. Blood pressure readings, cognitive test scores, reflex assessments. Every number normal, every observation precise. "Now," he said, pulling a separate sheet from the back of the folder, "compare that to this." He laid the fraudulent evaluation beside his own records. The contrast was immediate. Dr. Whitfield's report was vague, filled with generalized language, and contained no specific test results. No blood work, no imaging, no cognitive assessment scores. Just broad claims and a signature. "This document is fabricated," Dr. Pham said flatly. "Any physician reviewing it would see that within minutes. There are no baseline measurements, no follow-up recommendations, no referral codes. It reads like a template, not an evaluation." He removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "I also checked Dr. Whitfield's credentials," he continued. "He holds a license in North Carolina, but it was suspended for 14 months in 2016 for signing evaluations on patients he never examined. The suspension was quietly lifted after he completed a remedial program. He currently practices out of a private office in Raleigh with no hospital affiliation. And he is connected to Victor Hargrove," I said. Dr. Pham nodded. "College roommates. Class of 1982 at Duke." I confirmed it through the alumni registry. They have maintained contact. Victor donated $50,000 to a medical charity, Whitfield Chairs. The donation was made 2 months before your evaluation was signed. He let that settle between us. Ruth saw the disease in their hearts long before she saw it in her own body, he said quietly. She came to me not just as a patient, but as a strategist. She knew exactly what they would try, because she understood that greed follows a pattern. It starts with observation, moves to documentation, and ends with control. She interrupted the pattern at every stage. I looked out the window at the herb garden. The basil was tall, the rosemary thick, the lavender beginning to bud in the early spring warmth. Ruth had planted this garden too. Another seed, another safeguard. Dr. Pham, I said. Did she ever talk to you about her own health? His expression changed. The steadiness remained, but something deeper surfaced, a sadness he had clearly carried for a long time. She did, he said. She consulted me early, before her official diagnosis. I urged her to pursue aggressive treatment. She listened, asked thoughtful questions, and then chose her own path. He paused. She told me once that she had more important things to build than extra time. I disagreed with her then. I still do, but I respected her decision because it was made with full clarity, full awareness, and full love. The room felt smaller suddenly, warmer. I thought of Ruth in this same chair, weighing her own survival against the things she still needed to prepare, choosing me over time, choosing the garden, the trust, the network, over treatment that might have given her another year. I could not decide if that made me grateful or furious. Dr. Pham closed the folder and slid it across the desk. This is yours, he said. Certified copies of every examination, signed, dated, notarized. If they try to argue your competency in court, this will end the conversation before it begins. I took the folder. Thank you, I said. For everything. For the clinic. For keeping your promise. He stood and walked me to the door. Then he stopped and said, There is one more person Ruth wanted you to find. A journalist. Her name is Cora Bellingham. She has been watching Victor Hargrove very closely for 2 years. He met my eyes. Ruth told me Cora would be the one who ties it all together. She said, The roots are Henry's, the branches are ours. But the sunlight that makes everything visible, that is Cora. The rain had not stopped. It followed me from Dr. Pham's clinic, through the winding streets of West Asheville and into downtown, where the old brick buildings darkened with moisture, and the sidewalks glistened under street lamps that had come on early. Cora Bellingham had suggested we meet at a coffee shop on Wall Street, a narrow place with exposed beams and mismatched chairs that smelled of espresso and old wood. She said she would be at the back table. She said I would recognize her by the folder. She was right. The folder was impossible to miss. It sat on the table like a brick, 2 inches thick, edges worn soft from handling, held together with a rubber band that looked ready to surrender. Beside it, a laptop glowed faintly, and behind both, a woman in her mid-40s with dark auburn hair pulled into a loose braid, sharp green eyes, and the particular stillness of someone who had spent years watching people who did not know they were being watched. Mr. Porter, she said, standing to shake my hand. Sit down. We have a lot to cover. I sat. She poured me coffee from a carafe without asking. It was strong and black, the kind of coffee people drink when sleep has become optional. Ruth told me about you, I said. Cora smiled, brief and bittersweet. She told me about you too. She said you were the most patient man she had ever met, and that one day, your patience would be the thing that saved you. She opened the folder and turned it to face me. Inside were printed emails, financial records, corporate filings, property deeds, and photographs. Dozens of them, arranged chronologically and annotated in red ink. I have been investigating Victor Hargrove's business operations for 2 years, she said. Ruth asked me to. She came to me after she found Stephanie copying your documents and said she needed someone who could follow the money. That is what I do. She tapped the first page. Victor owns a company called Blue Ridge Capital Partners. On the surface, it is a real estate development firm. They have built 3 projects in western North Carolina over the past decade. Condominiums, mixed-use retail, a small hotel near the Biltmore area. All of them legitimate. On paper. She turned the page. But the funding structure does not add up. Each project received investment from a network of shell companies registered in Delaware and Wyoming. The money flows in, gets absorbed into construction costs, and comes out clean on the other side as profit from property sales. She looked at me. It is textbook money laundering, Henry. Victor is not building condominiums because he loves architecture. He is building them because every unit sold washes another $100,000 through the system. I stared at the numbers on the page. Columns of figures, account numbers, wire transfer dates. I did not understand all of it, but I understood enough. The money was not real estate money. It was something else wearing a real estate mask. Cora continued, turning to a section marked with a red tab. Now here is where it gets personal. The development plan for your land, the condominiums Stephanie told you about, is the largest project Victor has ever attempted. 40 units. Estimated sale value, $28 million. But the projected construction cost is only $11 million. That leaves $17 million unaccounted for. She paused. Unless the gap is being filled by dirty money that needs a place to land. My garden, I said quietly. They are using Ruth's land to wash money. Cora nodded. But it gets worse. She reached for her laptop and turned the screen toward me. I pulled records from the North Carolina Secretary of State's office. Blue Ridge Capital Partners has a subsidiary called Mountain Crest Holdings. It was incorporated 18 months ago. The registered agent is a law firm in Charlotte. But the sole director, listed under her maiden name, is Stephanie Hargrove. I felt the blood drain from my face. Stephanie is running part of the operation. She is not just married to your son, Henry. She is a business partner in her father's laundering network, and the condos on your land would have been her flagship project. Cora closed the laptop and leaned back. The coffee shop had emptied around us. Rain tapped against the windows in a steady rhythm that matched the pulse beating in my temples. There is more, Cora said. Ruth's patents. The 3 herbal compounds she developed are currently licensed to 2 universities and a pharmaceutical research firm. The annual royalty income is approximately $400,000. The patents themselves, if sold outright, could fetch between $8 and $12 million depending on the buyer. She met my eyes. Stephanie knows this. I found emails between her and a patent acquisition firm in Boston dated 6 months before Ruth died. She was already shopping the intellectual property before your wife was gone. The cruelty of it sat in my chest like a stone. Not just the land, not just the house. Ruth's mind, Ruth's work, the formulas she spent decades perfecting, the remedies that had healed Martha's hands and Cora's daughter, and countless others. Stephanie wanted to sell all of it. How did Ruth find you? I asked. Cora's expression softened. My daughter Lily was 9 when she got sick. Autoimmune disorder. The doctors tried everything. Steroids, immunosuppressants, experimental trials. Nothing worked. She was losing weight, losing hair, losing the light in her eyes. She paused and took a breath. A friend of a friend mentioned a pharmacist in Asheville who worked with herbal medicine. I was desperate enough to try anything. Ruth met us at her greenhouse. She spent 3 hours with Lily, asking questions, examining her skin, smelling her breath. Then she made a tincture from 4 different compounds and told us to come back in 2 weeks. Cora's voice thickened. Within a month, Lily's inflammation markers dropped by 60%. Within 3 months, she was back in school. The doctors called it a miracle. Ruth called it patience. She looked at me with eyes that held both gratitude and grief. When Ruth asked me to investigate Victor, I did not hesitate. She saved my daughter. I would have followed that woman into fire. I sat with that for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. 4 people now. 4 lives Ruth had rebuilt. 4 debts repaid. Not with money, but with loyalty. Cora reached into her bag and pulled out a small card with a web address written on it. "There is one more thing," she said. Ruth installed a camera system inside the greenhouse, solar-powered, motion-activated, streaming to a private server. She set it up 2 years ago and never told anyone except me. She gave me the server password. She slid the card across the table. "It is still recording, Henry, and I have access to everything it has captured." We drove to Cora's office after the coffee shop closed. It was a small rented space above a print shop on Cox Avenue. 1 room with a desk, 2 monitors, a filing cabinet, and a window that looked out onto an alley where rain collected in pools between the cobblestones. She locked the door behind us and powered up her laptop. The room had no overhead light, just the blue glow of the screens and the faint hum of the hard drive spinning to life. It felt like a submarine, sealed tight and sinking into something deep. Cora typed in the server address and entered the password. The screen flickered, then loaded a grid of thumbnail images, organized by date. Hundreds of them. 2 years of footage captured silently by a camera Ruth had hidden in the greenhouse, aimed through the glass walls toward the garden and the back of our house. She was watching them the whole time. I murmured. Cora nodded. Solar-powered. Motion-activated. The camera only records when it detects movement within range. Most of it is deer, raccoons, the occasional stray cat. But some of it is not. She clicked on a file dated 11 months ago. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Infrared. Nighttime. The timestamp read 2:14 in the morning. A figure moved across the garden from the back door of my house. Slim, purposeful, wearing a dark robe and carrying a flashlight aimed low. She moved past the lavender beds, past Eleanor the magnolia, and through the back door of my office, the small room off the garage, where I kept my files. Stefania. I watched her pull open my filing cabinet and photograph every document inside. Property deeds, tax returns, insurance records, Ruth's patent filings. She worked quickly, methodically, like someone who had done this before or had been told exactly what to look for. The footage continued for 9 minutes. Then she closed the drawer, turned off the flashlight, and walked back through the garden. At one point she paused beside the greenhouse, and the infrared glow caught her face clearly. There was no guilt in her expression, only focus. Cora clicked the next file. Different date. 3 weeks later. This time 2 figures moved through the garden. Stephanie and a taller shape I recognized immediately. Victor. They walked the perimeter of the property slowly, pausing at intervals. Victor held a tablet, tapping measurements into what appeared to be a surveying application. Stephanie pointed at specific areas: the greenhouse, the shed, the old stone wall along the north boundary. The audio was faint, but Cora had enhanced it. Victor's voice came through first, thick with calculation. "The greenhouse has to go. We will need that footprint for the access road. The herb beds can be graded flat in a day. Biggest value is the eastern slope. Mountain view units will sell at premium." Stephanie responded, "What about the patents? Those are the real prize. The land gives us the laundering vehicle, but her formulas are worth 10 times the dirt." Victor laughed. "One thing at a time. First, we get the old man declared incompetent. Then, everything falls to Marcus, which means it falls to you. The patents, the trust, the whole estate." Stephanie's voice came through sharp and certain. "Once the old man is declared incompetent, everything falls to us. Marcus will sign whatever I put in front of him. I stared at the screen. My own garden, filmed at night. My daughter-in-law and her father, standing among Ruth's lavender discussing how to strip me of everything I had. The casualness of it was worse than the crime. They spoke about my life the way contractors discuss a demolition schedule. Cora paused the footage. "There is one more clip you need to see," she said quietly. "This one is harder." She clicked a file dated 5 months ago. The camera captured the back porch of my house. Marcus sat on the steps, head in his hands. Stephanie stood over him, arms crossed, phone in one hand. Her voice carried clearly. "You will sign the competency petition or I will send the video to the police. Your choice." Marcus looked up. His face was pale, his eyes red. "Please, Steph. That was an accident. I was not even over the limit. You were .09. Over the legal line. And the dash cam from the other driver got your plate. I have the footage, Marcus. One phone call and you lose your license, your job, and any credibility you have left." Marcus dropped his head again. His shoulders shook. She watched him the way a person watches an insect under glass. Curious, but unmoved. "Sign the papers," she said. "And this all goes away." I reached out and closed the laptop myself. I could not watch anymore. My son, cornered in his own home, blackmailed into betraying his father by a woman who had studied his weaknesses the way a hunter studies tracks. Cora let the silence hold. Then she said, "Ruth knew about the video. She knew about the accident too." Marcus sideswiped a parked car outside a bar in Weaverville last spring. No one was hurt, but the owner filed a claim. Ruth found out before Stephanie did. She opened a separate folder on her desk and pulled out a single sheet of paper. A payment receipt. Settlement agreement. The car owner, a man named David Whitlow, had been compensated in full. The payment came from an account in Ruth's name, dated 3 weeks before she died. "She paid it off," I whispered. "Every cent," Cora said. And she kept the receipt. She also obtained a signed release from Whitlow, confirming no further legal action. Stephanie's leverage over Marcus is built on a threat that no longer exists. She just does not know it yet. I sat back. The room felt like it was breathing around me, contracting and expanding with every new revelation. Ruth had not just seen the trap. She had disarmed it, piece by piece. While she was dying, my phone buzzed. Grace's name appeared on the screen. I answered. "Henry," she said. "I filed the emergency motion this afternoon. Asset freeze, injunction against the land sale, and a petition to void the competency ruling." The judge signed all 3. I closed my eyes. "What happens now?" "By morning," she said, "everything they own will be frozen. Bank accounts, credit lines, corporate assets, all of it. They will not be able to buy a cup of coffee without a court order." I thanked her and hung up. Cora was already packing the footage onto a secure drive, her hands moving with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been preparing for this moment as long as I had. I looked out the window. The rain had stopped. The alley below glistened under a single street lamp, and somewhere beyond the rooftops, the Blue Ridge Mountains stood dark and patient against the clearing sky. Ruth's voice moved through my memory. "Do not fight with anger. Fight with truth." The truth was ready. And by morning, so were we. I slept that night for the first time in days. Not deeply, not peacefully, but enough for my body to stop shaking and my mind to settle into something resembling stillness. When I woke, the sun was already up, pouring through the kitchen window in long amber sheets. The mountains outside stood sharp against a clean blue sky, scrubbed fresh by the rain. I made coffee, sat at the table, looked out at the garden, or what remained of it. The bulldozers had not moved. The injunction Grace filed would have reached the construction company overnight. For now, the machine sat idle, steel jaws frozen open. I did not turn on the television or check my phone. I did not need to. I could feel the shift in the air the way you feel a storm breaking, not by the thunder but by the silence that comes just before. Across town, things were already falling apart. Cora called first. 9:15 in the morning. Her voice carried the sharp clarity of someone running on adrenaline and purpose. "It is done," she said. "I published the investigation this morning. Full piece. 12,000 words. Financial records, shell company filings, corporate fraud documentation. It is on the Asheville Tribune's website, and 3 wire services picked it up within the hour." She paused. The headline reads, "Garden of Greed. How a family schemed to seize a widow's land, uncovered a $1 million laundering operation." I closed my eyes. Garden of Greed. Ruth would have appreciated the poetry in that. Grace called 30 minutes later. "The asset freeze is in full effect," she said. "Every account linked to Victor Hargrove, Blue Ridge Capital Partners, and Mountain Crest Holdings is locked. Credit cards, business lines, personal savings, all of it. Stephanie's accounts are frozen as well, including a joint account she shares with Marcus." "What about the competency petition?" I asked. "Voided," Grace said. The judge reviewed Dr. Pham's records and dismissed the filing within minutes. He also flagged Dr. Whitfield for an ethics review. His license is under emergency suspension pending investigation. The kitchen was quiet. Sunlight moved slowly across the floor, touching the chair where Ruth used to sit. I thought of her hands, steady and certain, folding herbs into paper packets at this very table. She had built all of this. Every connection, every document, every safeguard. She had poured her last years into a structure so precise it could dismantle an empire. By noon, Cora's article had been shared over 40,000 times. Local television stations arrived in Asheville within hours, setting up cameras on Lexington Avenue, outside Victor's office, and in front of the garden. I watched some of it from my living room. A reporter stood on the sidewalk near my property line, gesturing toward the bulldozers behind her. "The garden behind me," she said, "belonged to the late Ruth Porter, a beloved pharmacist and herbalist who spent decades serving this community. Her family's land was sold without the knowledge of her surviving husband, and authorities now believe the sale was part of a larger financial fraud." They showed photographs of the garden in its full bloom, images Cora had sourced from the community center archives, Ruth kneeling among the lavender, Ruth teaching children to plant seeds, Ruth standing in front of the greenhouse smiling, her hands dark with soil. The comments poured in. Neighbors I had not spoken to in months left messages on my voicemail. The owner of the hardware store on Patton Avenue, where Elijah once slept behind the dumpster, dropped off a casserole with a note that read, "Ruth would be proud." By afternoon, the story had reached Stephanie. Cora forwarded me a clip from a local news broadcast. Stephanie stood outside Marcus's house, sunglasses too large for her face, a trench coat pulled tight against the spring chill. A reporter approached with a microphone. "Mrs. Porter, do you have a response to the allegations of fraud and elder abuse?" Stephanie's face twisted. "That old man is senile," she snapped. "He does not know what he is doing. This is a family matter, not a public spectacle." The reporter pressed. "Your father-in-law's medical records show no cognitive decline. Can you explain how a competency evaluation was filed by a physician who never examined him?" Stephanie's mouth opened, then closed. She looked directly into the camera, and for the first time I saw something crack behind her eyes. Not guilt, not remorse, fear. "This is harassment," she said, her voice climbing. "You are trespassing. Get off my property." She retreated inside and slammed the door. The clip ended, but the damage was already done. Within hours, the footage had been shared across every platform Cora could reach. The comments were merciless. People called her cruel, entitled, predatory. Someone created a hashtag, "Justice for Ruth's Garden." I did not celebrate. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the sunlight shifting across the floor. Ruth used to say that truth does not need volume, it just needs air. Once it breathes, it grows on its own. She was right. The truth was breathing now, and it was filling every room in Asheville. Victor fared no better. By evening, 2 detectives from the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office arrived at his office. Cora had forwarded her financial evidence to the district attorney that morning, and the response was swift. Victor was brought in for questioning. His lawyer arrived 20 minutes later, but the interview lasted 3 hours. Grace called me as the sun was setting. "They are building a case," she said. "Fraud, money laundering, forgery, elder abuse. The district attorney's office has assigned a dedicated team. Victor's lawyer requested bail conditions in advance, which tells me he already knows an arrest is coming." I looked out the window. The sky was turning violet, the mountains darkening into silhouettes. The bulldozers sat frozen in the fading light. "What about Stephanie?" I asked. Grace paused. "She has gone quiet. No more social media. No more outbursts. My guess is someone told her to stop talking." She hesitated, then added, "Henry, there is one more person Ruth wanted you to find before the hearing. A woman named Martha Callahan. She is 78 years old, lives on the other side of the ridge. Ruth treated her for chronic arthritis years ago. But more importantly, Stephanie visited Martha 6 months ago and threatened her." "Threatened her how?" "Martha knows the real value of Ruth's patents. Stephanie told her if she ever shared that information with anyone, she would make sure Martha's grandchildren lost their college scholarships. Victor sits on the board of a private foundation that funds those scholarships." My jaw tightened. "They threatened a 78-year-old woman's grandchildren. Ruth knew," Grace said softly. "She always knew. And Martha has been waiting to tell her story ever since." Martha Callahan lived on the far side of the ridge in a clapboard house with a tin roof and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides like an arm holding the place together. The road to get there wound through switchbacks and dense hardwood forest, the kind of mountain road where you lose your phone signal and gain something quieter in return. I found her in the front yard, kneeling beside a raised garden bed, hands deep in the soil. She was small, wiry, with silver hair pinned loosely and skin mapped with sun and years. She did not look up when I pulled into the gravel drive. She just kept working, pressing seedlings into the earth with fingers that moved with a steadiness that surprised me. Grace had called her that morning. She was expecting me, but she finished planting 3 more starts before she stood, wiped her hands on her apron, and turned. "You must be Henry," she said. Her voice was clear and firm, not the voice of a woman who had been silenced, the voice of a woman who had been waiting. "I am," I said. She looked at me for a long moment, the way people do when they are measuring not your appearance but your weight. Then she nodded. "Come inside. I have coffee on and a story that has been sitting in my chest for too long." Her kitchen was small and warm, smelling of biscuits and wood smoke. A cast-iron skillet sat on the stove. Dried herbs hung from hooks along the window frame, and I recognized several of them from Ruth's greenhouse. Feverfew, turmeric, root, valerian. Martha poured 2 cups and sat across from me at a table scarred with decades of meals and conversation. She folded her hands and began. "I met Ruth 11 years ago," she said. "My doctor told me my rheumatoid arthritis was untreatable. Said I should prepare for a wheelchair by 70. My hands were so swollen, I could not button my own shirt. I could not hold a fork. I could not kneel in my garden. And that nearly killed me faster than the disease." She lifted her hands and turned them over. The knuckles were still slightly enlarged, but the fingers moved freely, bending and extending without hesitation. A neighbor mentioned a pharmacist in Asheville who worked with plant-based medicine. I drove down the mountain expecting nothing. Ruth met me in her greenhouse, spent 2 hours asking about my diet, my sleep, my stress. She smelled my hands. She actually smelled them, like she was reading something only she could see. Martha smiled faintly. She made me a compound. 4 ingredients. She told me to take it twice a day with warm water and to eat ginger with every meal. She also gave me a salve for my joints and told me to rub it in every night while thinking about something I loved. I asked her if the thinking part was medical. She laughed and said, "Everything is medical, Martha. Your body listens to your heart more than it listens to your doctor." She paused and looked at me with eyes that held both tenderness and steel. Within 2 months, the swelling was down by half. Within 6 months, I was back in my garden. Within a year, my doctor ran new tests and said he could not explain it. Ruth could. She explained it with a 3-page paper she had written about the compound and its mechanism. She filed a patent the following year. She leaned forward. That patent, Henry, compound number 2 in her portfolio, is currently licensed to a pharmaceutical research firm in Boston. The annual royalty alone is $140,000. If sold outright, conservative estimates put its value at $4 million. She set her cup down firmly. And Stephanie knows. The kitchen went quiet except for the ticking of a clock on the wall. 6 months ago, Martha continued, a woman showed up at my door, unannounced. Pretty, well-dressed, cold. She introduced herself as Ruth's daughter-in-law and said she was conducting research into Ruth's estate. She asked me what I knew about the patents. Martha's jaw tightened. I told her I knew they helped people. That was all she needed to hear. She smiled and said if I ever shared details about the patents with anyone, especially their value, she would make sure my grandchildren lost their scholarships. She said Victor sits on the board of the Hargrove Family Foundation. Both my granddaughters receive full tuition funding through that foundation. Stephanie said one phone call from her father, and those scholarships disappear. I stared at her. The cruelty of it was so precise it felt surgical, threatening a 78-year-old woman through her grandchildren, using charity as leverage, turning generosity into a weapon. What did you do? I asked. Martha reached beneath the table and pulled out a small digital recorder, identical to the one Ruth had left in the greenhouse. She set it between us. Ruth taught me to always keep receipts, she said. I recorded every word. She pressed play. Stephanie's voice filled the kitchen, clear and unmistakable. You seem like a smart woman, Martha. I am sure you understand that some things are better left private. My father funds those scholarships personally. It would be a shame if your granddaughters had to leave school because you decided to talk about things that do not concern you. Martha's recorded voice responded calmly. Are you threatening me, dear? I am advising you, Stephanie replied. There is a difference. Martha stopped the recording and looked at me. Ruth always said, the people who hurt others the most are the ones who believe they are simply being practical. She slid the recorder across the table. Take it. Give it to your lawyer. I will testify in court if you need me to. I have waited long enough. I picked up the recorder. It was warm from her hands, light and plain, but loaded with the kind of evidence that collapses entire structures. Martha, I said, thank you for keeping your promise. She shook her head. Ruth kept hers first. She gave me back my hands, Henry. The least I can do is use them to help you. I drove back down the mountain with the recorder on the passenger seat beside the growing stack of folders and evidence that had accumulated over the past week. The road unwound through the forest, dappled light falling across the windshield like scattered coins. Grace called as I reached the valley floor. Her voice was steady, but there was an edge of anticipation beneath it. The hearing is set for Thursday, she said. Buncombe County Courthouse. 9 in the morning. Judge Margaret Calloway, presiding. We present everything. I exhaled slowly. Everything, everything. She confirmed. The trust documents. The fraudulent medical evaluation. Dr. Pham's records. The camera footage. Cora's financial investigation. And now Martha's recording. Henry, this is the strongest case I have ever assembled. Ruth built it like a cathedral. All we have to do is open the doors. I hung up and drove in silence for a while, watching the mountains shift color as the sun dipped lower. Thursday, 2 days away. 2 days until Ruth's garden would finally speak for itself in a room where the truth was not optional. That night I stood in the garden one last time before the hearing. The air smelled of damp earth and early blooming jasmine. The greenhouse glowed faintly in the moonlight, its glass walls holding the dark the way a lantern holds a flame. I pressed my hand against the cool soil and whispered, "We are almost there, Ruth. Just hold on a little longer." The wind moved through the basil. The choir hummed softly. And somewhere in the dark, I swore I heard her whisper back. The Buncombe County Courthouse smelled of lemon polish and old wood, the kind of scent that belongs to buildings where decisions have weight and silence has authority. Sunlight poured through the tall arched windows, falling across the gallery benches in clean white bars. I arrived early. The hallway was still empty, except for a security guard and a clerk carrying a stack of files. My footsteps echoed against the marble floor, each one steady, deliberate, like the ticking of a clock that had finally reached its hour. Grace met me at the entrance to the courtroom. She wore a dark blue suit and carried a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen 100 battles and won most of them. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp, 2 points of focus that missed nothing. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Like a man about to open a door he cannot close," I said. She nodded. "Good. That is exactly how you should feel." The courtroom filled slowly. Cora sat in the second row with her laptop open, recording everything. Elijah took a seat near the back, his broad shoulders hunched forward, hands clasped between his knees. Martha arrived with a younger woman I assumed was her daughter, who held her arm gently and guided her to a seat. Then Stephanie entered. She walked in with the posture of a woman who still believed appearance could outrun evidence. Black dress, pearl earrings, hair pulled tight. Her eyes swept the room once, cataloging faces, calculating odds. Behind her came Victor. Silver-haired and rigid, his jaw set in the expression of a man who had spent his entire career controlling rooms and was not prepared to lose one. Marcus came last. He sat at the far end of the gallery, alone, staring at his hands. He did not look at me. He did not look at anyone. "All rise," the bailiff called. "Court is now in session." The Honorable Judge Margaret Calloway, presiding. The judge was a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and reading glasses that sat on the bridge of her nose like a checkpoint. She reviewed the case summary in silence for a full minute before looking up. "Counselor Wynne," she said, "you may proceed." Grace stood and walked to the front of the courtroom with the unhurried confidence of someone who had rehearsed not the words, but the truth behind them. "Your Honor," she began, "this case concerns the systematic exploitation of an elderly widower by members of his own family. The respondents, Stephanie Hargrove Porter and her father Victor Hargrove, conspired to seize control of Henry Porter's estate through fraud, forgery, and emotional coercion." She opened her briefcase and placed the first exhibit on the stand. "This is a medical competency evaluation filed 8 months ago with this court. It declares Henry Porter mentally unfit to manage his affairs. It is signed by Dr. Alan Whitfield of Raleigh." She paused. "Dr. Whitfield has never examined Mr. Porter. He has never visited Asheville. His medical license was previously suspended for signing fraudulent evaluations. And he is a personal associate of Victor Hargrove, his college roommate at Duke University." A murmur moved through the gallery. The judge silenced it with a look. Grace placed the second exhibit. "These are the authentic medical records of Henry Porter, compiled by Dr. David Pham, a licensed physician who has examined Mr. Porter twice in the past 3 years. They confirm full cognitive function, clear reasoning, and no signs of decline." She turned the page. "The respondents used the fraudulent evaluation as the basis for a competency petition, which, if granted, would have transferred legal authority over Mr. Porter's finances, property, and medical decisions to his son Marcus, who is married to Stephanie." Grace let the implications settle before continuing. "The land sale that prompted this hearing was executed without Henry Porter's knowledge or consent. The property, a 2-acre garden cultivated by his late wife Ruth Porter for over 30 years, was sold to a development company owned and operated by Victor Hargrove. She placed another document on the stand. That company, Blue Ridge Capital Partners, is currently under investigation for money laundering. The condominium project planned for the Porter property was structured to process over $17 million in unaccounted funds through fraudulent construction invoicing. Victor shifted in his chair. His lawyer leaned toward him and whispered something. Victor's face did not change, but his hands tightened on the armrest. Grace called her first witness, Elijah Ward. Elijah rose slowly from the back of the courtroom and walked to the stand. He looked enormous in the witness box, but his voice was gentle when he spoke. "State your name and your relationship to the Porter family," Grace said. "My name is Elijah Ward. I knew Ruth Porter for 15 years. She saved my life when no one else would look at me." Grace guided him through his testimony. Elijah described Ruth's instructions, the key, the greenhouse, the promise he had kept. Then she asked him about the garden itself. "Ruth told me every plant in that garden had a name," Elijah said. "Not just the Latin names, personal names. She named them after people she helped. She said the garden was her way of remembering that kindness does not disappear. It just changes shape." His voice thickened. "She also asked me to keep watch. She knew someone would come for the garden eventually. She told me, 'Elijah, the people who smile the widest are sometimes the ones digging the deepest holes. Just pay attention.'" "Did you observe anything unusual?" Grace asked. "Yes, ma'am. Several times over the past 2 years I saw Stephanie and her father on the property after dark, measuring the land, taking photographs. Once I saw Stephanie enter Mr. Porter's office through the back door at 2 in the morning. I reported it to Ruth before she passed. She told me to keep watching, and that one day it would matter." Grace thanked him and called her second witness, Martha Callahan. Martha walked to the stand slowly, her daughter hovering nearby, but her eyes were steady and her back was straight. She placed her hands on the railing and looked directly at the judge. Grace asked her about Ruth's treatment, the patent, and Stephanie's visit. Martha spoke clearly. "She came to my house 6 months ago and told me that if I ever shared information about the value of Ruth's patents with anyone, my granddaughters would lose their college scholarships. She said her father controlled the foundation that funded them. She said one phone call was all it would take." "Did you record that conversation?" Grace asked. "I did," Martha said. "Ruth always told me to keep receipts." Grace placed the recorder on the evidence table and pressed play. Stephanie's voice filled the courtroom, sharp and unmistakable. The words landed on the silent room like stones dropped into water. When the recording ended, Judge Calloway removed her glasses and looked at Stephanie for a long moment before turning to the defense table. "Does the respondent wish to address this evidence?" Stephanie's lawyer stood, opened his mouth, then closed it. He leaned toward Stephanie, whispered, and straightened again. "No questions at this time, Your Honor." Grace nodded. She reached into her briefcase one final time. "Your Honor," she said, "we have one final piece of evidence. A recording made by Ruth Porter herself, shortly before her death. She intended it to be heard in exactly this setting." The courtroom went still. Even the air seemed to pause. Grace placed the recorder on the evidence table and pressed play. For a moment there was only static, soft and distant, like wind through an empty room. Then Ruth's voice broke through, steady and clear, carrying the particular weight of someone who knows exactly how many words she has left. "To whoever is listening," she began, "my name is Ruth Porter. I am recording this in my greenhouse on a Tuesday evening in October. The lavender is still blooming outside. I can smell it through the glass." A tremor ran through the courtroom. Not sound. Something deeper. The kind of tremor that moves through people when they recognize they are hearing something that cannot be repeated. "I am dying," Ruth continued. "I have known for some time. But this recording is not about my death. It is about what I need to protect before I go." Her voice did not waver. She spoke the way she lived, with precision and warmth in equal measure. My daughter-in-law Stephanie and her father Victor have been planning to take our land, our home, and my life's work. I have watched them move through my family the way termites move through wood. Quietly, steadily, from the inside. They believe I do not see them. They are wrong. She paused. In the courtroom, the silence was so complete. I could hear the fluorescent lights humming above. I did not plant evidence, she said. I planted truth. It just took time to bloom. Every document, every recording, every person I asked to hold a piece of this story, they are not weapons. They are seeds. And seeds do not grow on anger. They grow on patience. She took a breath that crackled faintly through the speaker. I want to speak directly to the court. My husband, Henry Porter, is sound of mind, strong of heart, and the most decent man I have ever known. Any claim to the contrary is a fabrication designed to strip him of his autonomy and his dignity. I ask that this court protect him the way he has protected everything I have ever loved. The recording paused. I thought it was over. Then Ruth spoke again, softer now, as if she had leaned closer to the microphone, and to Stephanie. If you are in the room, I want you to know that I never hated you. Hatred requires energy I chose to spend elsewhere. But I saw you. From the very beginning, I saw you, and I made sure that everything you tried to take in darkness would be brought into light. The recorder clicked off. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, pressurized. The kind of silence that holds the room in place while people remember how to breathe. Judge Calloway sat motionless for several seconds. Then she removed her glasses, set them on the bench, and turned to Grace. "Counselor, is there additional evidence?" Grace nodded. "Yes, Your Honor. We would like to present video surveillance footage recovered from a camera system installed by Ruth Porter in her greenhouse." She connected her laptop to the courtroom display. The screen mounted on the wall flickered to life. The footage appeared in infrared, gray and green. The garden at night, the greenhouse glowing faintly at its center. The first clip showed Stephanie entering Henry's office at 2:14 in the morning. The courtroom watched her open filing cabinets, photograph documents, and leave without a trace. The second clip showed Victor and Stephanie walking the property with a surveying tablet. Victor's voice came through the speakers, enhanced by Cora's audio processing. "The greenhouse has to go. Biggest value is the eastern slope." Then Stephanie's voice, sharp and clear. "Once the old man is declared incompetent, everything falls to us." A gasp moved through the gallery. Someone in the back row whispered something I could not hear. Stephanie sat rigid, her face drained of color, her hands gripping the edge of the table. The third clip was the one I dreaded most. Marcus on the back porch. Stephanie standing over him, her voice cutting through the night air. "You will sign the competency petition, or I will send the video to the police. Your choice." Marcus's recorded voice, broken and desperate. "Please, Steph. That was an accident. I did not look at my son. I could not." The sound of his voice in that clip, the sound of a man being dismantled by someone he trusted, was enough to make the walls of the courtroom feel too close. Grace stopped the footage. The screen went dark. She turned to the judge. "Your Honor," she said. "The evidence presented today demonstrates a coordinated conspiracy to defraud Henry Porter of his estate, falsify his medical records, launder money through a fraudulent real estate development, and coerce a family member through blackmail. We respectfully request that the court issue an immediate ruling." Judge Calloway looked at the defense table. Stephanie's lawyer was whispering urgently. Victor stared straight ahead, his face locked in an expression that was trying very hard to be stone but was crumbling at the edges. The judge spoke. "Based on the evidence presented, this court finds sufficient grounds to refer this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Charges to be considered include fraud, forgery, elder abuse, money laundering, coercion, and conspiracy." She turned to Stephanie. Mrs. Porter, your conduct as presented in this courtroom is deeply troubling. You are hereby prohibited from contacting Henry Porter or accessing any property or asset connected to the Porter estate. Bail conditions will be set by the criminal court. She looked at Victor. Mr. Hargrove, the same restrictions apply. Additionally, this court orders a full audit of Blue Ridge Capital Partners and all subsidiary entities. Dr. Alan Whitfield's medical license is referred to the State Medical Board for immediate suspension pending review. Her gavel struck once. The sound was sharp, final, and absolute. Stephanie stood abruptly. Her chair scraped against the floor. She opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it. Her eyes swept the room, searching for something, an ally, an exit, a version of reality where she was still in control. She found none. 2 officers approached. She was escorted out through a side door, her heels clicking against the marble in a rhythm that slowed with every step. Victor followed moments later, flanked by his lawyer, his silver hair catching the light one last time before he disappeared into the hallway. The courtroom exhaled. I sat still for a long time. Grace gathered her files beside me, quiet and efficient. Cora closed her laptop and nodded at me from across the room. Elijah stood near the back wall, arms folded, eyes glistening. Martha sat with her daughter, hands folded in her lap, calm as a woman who had finally set down something heavy. I walked out into the hallway. The sunlight hit me like warm water. The air smelled of spring and stone, and the faint sweetness of dogwood blossoms drifting from the courthouse lawn. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned. Marcus stood at the top of the courthouse steps. His tie was loosened. His eyes were red. His hands hung at his sides, like they had forgotten what to hold. "Dad," he said. His voice cracked on the single syllable. "I need to tell you everything." He came to the house that evening. I told him at the courthouse that I was not ready to talk there. Not on marble steps, with reporters circling and cameras flashing. I told him to come home. Home. The word felt strange in my mouth, but it was the only one that fit. When he arrived, the sun had already dropped behind the ridge. The garden was dim, the air cool with the scent of jasmine beginning its evening bloom. Marcus parked in the driveway and sat in his car for a long time before getting out. I watched him from the kitchen window. He walked to the garden first. Not to the house. To the garden. I found him kneeling beside the rosemary bed, his hands in the dirt, pulling weeds that had grown through the stones in the weeks since the bulldozers arrived. His dress shirt was still on from the courthouse, sleeves rolled to the elbows, knees dark with soil. He looked like the boy he used to be. The one who spent summers beside Ruth, learning the names of every plant, laughing when she told him the basil was singing. I stepped outside and sat on the porch step. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the soft tearing of roots as he pulled weed after weed, methodical, almost penitent, as if each one he removed was a confession. When he finally came to the porch, his eyes were swollen and his hands were black with earth. He sat beside me, not close, but close enough. "Dad," he said, "I do not know where to start." "Start wherever it hurts the most," I said. "That is usually the truest place." He stared at the ground. The first year Stephanie and I were married, she found out about a night I had in Weaverville. I went out with coworkers, drank too much, sideswiped a parked car on the way home. Nobody was hurt, but there was dashcam footage from the car behind me. Stephanie got hold of it. I do not know how, but she kept it. He swallowed. She never threatened me with it directly. Not at first. She would just mention it, casually, like a joke. "Remember that night in Weaverville? You are lucky I am the one who found that video, and not the police." It was always there, hanging over me like a blade she never had to drop because I could feel it every time she smiled. His voice cracked. When she told me about the land sale, I said, "No." I told her the garden was yours, that it was Mom's, that it was not ours to touch. She laughed. Then she pulled out the video and said if I did not sign the transfer documents, she would send it to the sheriff's department and to my employer. He pressed his palms against his knees. I panicked. I signed. I told myself I could fix it later, that it was just paperwork, that it would not really happen. But it did. And then the bulldozers came and I could not look at you because every time I saw your face, I saw Mom's. The crickets had started their evening chorus. The garden hummed softly around us, alive despite everything that had been done to it. Then the competency petition, Marcus continued. She told me it was just a formality, a legal step to simplify the estate management. She said you would never even know. I believed her because I needed to believe something that made me feel less like a monster. He turned to me. I am not asking you to forgive me. I do not deserve that. I just need you to know that I did not want any of this. I was too afraid to stop it, and too ashamed to ask for help. I sat with his words for a long time. The air between us was thick, with everything that had gone unsaid for months. I thought of Ruth's voice on the recording. I do not blame Marcus. He is weak, yes, but weakness is not the same as wickedness. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I had carried it since the day Cora showed it to me, waiting for this moment. I handed it to Marcus. He unfolded it slowly. It was the settlement receipt. Ruth's payment to David Whitlow, the owner of the car Marcus had sideswiped. Full compensation. Signed. Release. Dated 3 weeks before Ruth died. Marcus stared at it. His breathing stopped. Then his face crumbled. Not the controlled grief of a man trying to hold himself together, but the full collapse of someone who has just realized they were loved far more deeply than they knew. Mom knew, he whispered. She knew, I said. She paid it off. She got a signed release. Stephanie's leverage over you was built on a threat that stopped existing before your mother took her last breath. He pressed the receipt against his chest and bent forward, sobbing quietly, his shoulders shaking the way they used to when he was 5 years old, and fell off his bicycle and ran to Ruth instead of me because she always knew how to make the pain smaller. I put my hand on his back. I did not say it was okay. It was not okay. But I held him because that is what fathers do. Even when the holding hurts. After a long time, he straightened. He wiped his face with the back of his hand and reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a photograph, creased from being folded and unfolded many times. I found this in one of Mom's boxes, he said. In the garage. Behind the paint cans. It was a picture of Marcus and Ruth in the garden, maybe 15 years ago. Both of them laughing, hands covered in soil. A row of freshly planted tomatoes behind them. Ruth's arm was draped over his shoulder. Her smile was enormous, unguarded. The smile of a woman who believed the person beside her was exactly where he was supposed to be. I turned the photo over. On the back, in Ruth's handwriting, 5 words. The soil forgives every season. I read them twice. Then I handed the photograph back to Marcus. He held it the way you hold something breakable, with both hands and all of your attention. We sat on the porch until the stars came out. We did not say much. Words had done their work. What remained was the kind of silence that does not divide but joins. The silence of 2 people who have seen each other clearly and chosen to stay. The next morning, Marcus came back. He brought work gloves, a wheelbarrow, and a pair of boots that looked new. We started at the eastern edge, where the bulldozers had torn the worst damage, and worked our way inward. We did not talk about Stephanie. We did not talk about the trial. We pulled weeds, straightened stones, replanted rosemary starts from a tray Elijah had dropped off at dawn. The work was slow, physical, honest. It asked nothing of us except presence. Around noon, I was digging near the base of the old rose bush, the first plant Ruth ever put in the ground the year we moved in. The roots were deep and tangled, thick with 30 years of growth. My shovel struck something solid beneath them. I stopped. Marcus looked over. The metal edge of something small and square glinted in the fresh-turned soil, buried among the roots like the garden itself had been holding it safe. The box was no larger than a man's hand. Dark metal gone soft with rust, nested among the roots like something the earth had been cradling since before I knew to look. Marcus knelt beside me and together we loosened the soil around it, pulling roots aside gently, as if we were delivering something fragile from the belly of the garden. I lifted it free. The weight surprised me. Not heavy, but present, like holding a word you have been waiting to hear. We carried it to the porch. I set it on the step between us and brushed the dirt from the lid. There was no lock, just a simple clasp, green with age, that opened with a soft click when I pressed it. Inside, 3 things. Each one wrapped in cloth Ruth had embroidered herself. The first was a small velvet pouch. I loosened the drawstring and tilted it into my palm. Ruth's wedding ring, the thin gold band I had slipped onto her finger 42 years ago in a courthouse, not so different from the one I had just left. It caught the sunlight and held it. Warm and certain. I had searched for this ring after she died. I had turned the house inside out, checked every drawer, every pocket, every box in the closet. I thought she had lost it in the last weeks, when her hands grew thin and things slipped from her grip without warning. She had not lost it. She had planted it. The second item was a rolled sheet of drafting paper, tied with a piece of twine. I unrolled it carefully. It was a blueprint, drawn in Ruth's precise hand, labeled in her pharmacist's script, Ruth's Garden Foundation. It read across the top. Below that, a detailed floor plan, workshop spaces, a greenhouse classroom, a tool library, a community kitchen, an herb drying room, supply lists, budget estimates, zoning notes. She had designed an entire facility, down to the placement of the windows and the species of plants she wanted in each bed. At the bottom of the blueprint, she had written a single line. For those who have lost what they thought they could not live without. Marcus leaned over my shoulder. She drew this, he said quietly. She planned the whole thing. She planned everything, I said. The third item was a USB drive taped to a small envelope. My name was on the front in Ruth's handwriting. I opened the envelope first. Inside were 2 sheets of paper. The first was a letter from her oncologist, dated 9 months before she died. The language was clinical, but the meaning was clear. Treatment options remained viable. Remission was possible with aggressive intervention. The doctor urged her to begin immediately. The second sheet was Ruth's reply, handwritten on the back of the medical letter. Dr. Wellman, she wrote, thank you for your honesty and your care. But I have made my decision. I have spent my life planting things that take time to grow. I have a few more seeds to put in the ground before I go. If I begin treatment now, I will spend my remaining months in hospitals, too weak to finish what I have started. I would rather spend them in my greenhouse, building something that will outlast me. Henry will grieve either way. But if I prepare properly, he will not grieve alone. He will have a garden full of people who owe me a promise. And he will have a reason to keep living that is bigger than my absence. The letter trembled in my hands. Marcus read it over my shoulder and made a sound I had never heard from him before. Not a sob, not a word. Something between the two. A sound that lives in the place where love and loss share the same room. She chose us, he whispered. Over herself. I could not speak. My throat was closed. My eyes burned. I held the letter against my chest and breathed until the world stopped spinning. After a long time, I stood and walked to the greenhouse. Marcus followed. I plugged the USB drive into the old laptop. Ruth kept on her workbench, the one she used for research and patent filings. The screen flickered to life. A video file appeared, titled simply, For Henry. I clicked play. Ruth appeared on the screen, sitting in the greenhouse, right where I was standing now. The light through the glass was soft and golden, Late afternoon. She was thinner than I wanted to remember, her cheekbones sharper, the scarf around her head a deep blue that made her eyes look enormous. But those eyes, they were the same, clear and steady, and so full of knowing that it hurt to meet them even through a screen. "Hi, love," she said and smiled. "If you are watching this, then my stubborn heart has finally stopped, and I am guessing you have been sitting in this house trying to hold everything together with your bare hands." She leaned closer to the camera. "I know you, Henry Porter. You fix things. That is your way of loving. So I left you something to fix. Something that might fix you too." She gestured around the greenhouse. "You will find the blueprint in the box. I designed it myself. Every room, every garden bed, every tool station. I want you to build it here. On our land. In our garden. A place where people who have lost everything can come and learn to build again. Not a memorial. Not a museum. A workshop. A living thing." Her voice softened. "I spent my last months planting people instead of treating my body. I know that sounds selfish. Maybe it is. But I looked at the math, Henry. Treatment gave me a chance at more time. But more time doing what? Lying in a hospital bed while Stephanie dismantled everything we built?" She shook her head. "I chose differently. I chose to spend my time building a wall around you so thick that no one could tear it down. I chose to make sure that when I left, you would not be alone. You would have Elijah and Grace and Dr. Pham and Cora and Martha. You would have a foundation with your name beside mine. You would have a reason to wake up that is not grief." She paused. Her eyes glistened, but she did not cry. "I chose you over time, Henry. I chose making sure you would live over making sure I would. That is not sacrifice. That is love finishing what it started." The video ended. The screen went dark. The greenhouse was silent, except for the hum of a bee somewhere near the ceiling, and the faint rustle of wind through the open door. Marcus stood behind me, his hand on my shoulder. Neither of us moved. I stared at the blank screen for a long time. Then I closed the laptop gently, the way you close a book that has told you everything you needed to hear. I walked to the center of the greenhouse and knelt on the terracotta tiles, the same tiles Ruth had laid by hand years ago. I pressed my palms flat against the cool surface and whispered, "You did not leave me, did you, Ruth? You just planted me somewhere I could grow." The light shifted through the glass. The air smelled of lavender and earth, and something faintly sweet, like the memory of bread, rising in a warm kitchen. I reached into my pocket and took out her wedding ring. I threaded it onto the chain I wore around my neck, the one that held my own father's dog tags. The gold settled against my chest, warm and small, and I felt the weight of it, the way you feel a hand reaching for yours in the dark. I looked at the blueprint spread across the workbench. The lines were clean. The vision was clear. Ruth had drawn the future before I knew I needed one. "All right, Eve," I whispered. "Let us build it." It began with a hammer and a handshake. Elijah showed up the morning after I made my decision, his truck loaded with lumber, his sleeves already rolled. He did not ask what the plan was. He just looked at the blueprint I had pinned to the greenhouse wall, nodded once, and said, "Where do we start?" Marcus came next. Then Grace, who brought not tools but incorporation papers, tax exemption filings, and a list of zoning permits she had already begun processing. Dr. Pham arrived that afternoon with a team of volunteers from his clinic, young men and women who carried bags of soil and seedlings the way soldiers carry supplies into territory that has just been reclaimed. Within a week, the garden had transformed from a wounded landscape into a construction site humming with purpose. The bulldozers were gone, towed away by the county after the injunction was finalized. In their place stood sawhorses, stacks of reclaimed timber, and a growing frame of what would become the main workshop building. Ruth's blueprint guided everything. I kept a laminated copy on a clipboard and carried it with me from station to station, checking measurements, adjusting angles, making sure every beam and bracket matched her vision. She had designed the building to sit at the eastern edge of the garden, oriented so the morning sun would pour through the workshop windows and the afternoon light would warm the greenhouse classroom. Marcus handled the landscape architecture. He redesigned the garden paths to flow around the new structures, preserving the original plantings wherever possible. The rosemary beds were restored, the lavender rose replanted. Eleanor the magnolia, untouched by the bulldozers, stood at the center of it all like a matriarch watching her family rebuild. He worked quietly, methodically, with a focus I had not seen in him since he was a boy building model airplanes at the kitchen table. One evening I found him on his knees beside the herb beds, pressing seedlings into the soil with his bare hands. "Mom taught me this," he said without looking up. "She said you have to feel the roots settle before you let go. Otherwise, they do not know which way to grow." Elijah became the garden manager. He knew every plant by name, Latin and personal. And he moved through the beds with the ease of a man returning to the only home that had ever made sense. He trained the volunteers, organized the planting schedule, and built a tool library in the shed from donated equipment the community dropped off daily. The greenhouse was cleaned, repaired, and converted into a library and learning center. Dr. Pham stocked one section with books on herbal medicine, nutrition, and wellness. Cora donated shelves of journalism and writing resources. Grace added a small legal reference section focused on elder rights, estate planning, and tenant advocacy. The glass walls that had once hidden Ruth's secrets now held the knowledge she had spent her life gathering. Word spread. The Asheville Tribune ran a follow-up article titled, "From Greed to Garden," and within days, donations began arriving. Cash, tools, seeds, lumber. A retired electrician offered to wire the building for free. A local restaurant pledged weekly meals for volunteers. The hardware store on Patton Avenue, where Elijah had once slept behind the dumpster, donated an entire wall of supplies and hung a sign in the window that read, "Proud supporter of Ruth's Garden." The classes began before the building was even finished. Women from a domestic violence shelter came on Tuesdays to learn woodworking. A group of recently released inmates came on Thursdays for horticulture training. Elijah led the sessions with the patience of a man who understood exactly what it meant to be given a second chance. On Saturdays, elderly residents from across the county gathered for what Dr. Pham called garden therapy, an afternoon of planting, tea, and conversation that left most of them smiling in ways their families said they had not seen in years. One afternoon, a woman named Linda, a retired school teacher who had lost her husband the previous winter, stopped me in the workshop hallway. She was holding a clay pot she had just glazed, still warm from the kiln. "When I am here," she said, "I forget I am alone. I feel useful again." I looked at her and saw what Ruth had always seen in people. Not their loss, but their capacity. Not the wound, but the place where healing could begin. Then the letter arrived from Japan. It came on a Wednesday, international postmark, cream-colored envelope, handwritten address. I opened it at my desk in the small office we had built in the corner of the workshop. The letter was written in careful English on thick paper that smelled faintly of cedar. "Dear Mr. Porter," it began. "My name is Dr. Emiko Tanaka. I am a professor of pharmacology at Kyoto University. Your wife and I collaborated on research for nearly a decade. She was the most brilliant and most humble scientist I have ever known." I set the letter down and took a breath before continuing. "I recently read the article about your foundation in an international newswire. I was moved beyond words. Ruth once told me that her greatest fear was not death but uselessness. She said she wanted every hour of her life to count for someone other than herself." Dr. Tanaka went on to describe their work together, the development of herbal anti-inflammatory compounds that had led to 2 of Ruth's 3 patents. She wrote about Ruth's visits to Kyoto, her curiosity about Japanese botanical traditions, her insistence that healing was a conversation between the plant and the patient, then the final paragraph. "In honor of Ruth's legacy and the extraordinary work you have built in her name, I am donating $6 million to Ruth's Garden Foundation." This gift is made through the Tanaka Institute for Botanical Medicine, which Ruth helped me establish 12 years ago. She would not have wanted recognition, so I will simply say this. Ruth's herbs did not just heal bodies, they healed futures. Please use this gift to ensure that her garden continues to grow long after all of us have returned to the soil. I read the letter 3 times. Then I set it beside the blueprint and the photograph of Ruth and Marcus laughing in the garden and the wedding ring on its chain and all the other pieces of a life that refused to end. $6 million. From a woman in Kyoto I had never met, whose career Ruth had helped build in the same quiet way. She built everything. One seed at a time. One season at a time. Trusting that growth would come. That evening Grace stopped by. She looked at the letter, read it twice, and shook her head slowly. "Henry," she said, "your wife's reach was global. She was planting seeds on the other side of the world, and none of us even knew." I nodded. "She always said kindness was not random. It was architecture." Grace smiled. "The opening ceremony is this Saturday. Everything is ready." But Ruth left one last recording. She wanted everyone to hear it. Saturday came the way Ruth always described perfect mornings. Quiet first, then golden. I stood at the edge of what used to be a 2-acre herb garden in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Now it was something else entirely. The greenhouse had been rebuilt with floor-to-ceiling glass panels that caught the early light like a cathedral. Inside, shelves lined with Ruth's original jars sat beside new workstations, where women would learn to mix tinctures, brew remedies, and build futures they never imagined possible. Elijah had painted the front gate himself. Deep green, with gold letters that read Ruth's Garden Foundation. He stood beside it now, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time, looking more nervous than the day he first knocked on my door with a brass key in his hand. Marcus was already inside, checking the wiring on the projector screen. My son had designed the interior layout himself, every corner shaped by the blueprint Ruth buried beneath her first rose bush. He had not spoken much in recent weeks. He did not need to. His hands spoke for him. Carrying lumber, sanding tables, planting new lavender beds along the walkway. By 9 o'clock, the road leading up the mountain was lined with cars. Grace arrived in her gray sedan, carrying a leather folder and a small speaker wrapped in cloth. Dr. Pham brought his wife and 2 nurses from the community clinic. Cora Bellingham came with a photographer from the Asheville Tribune. Martha Callahan walked slowly up the gravel path, leaning on a wooden cane her grandson carved for her birthday. And then the strangers came. Dozens of them. Women who had read Cora's article. Former inmates who had heard about Elijah's story. College students studying herbal medicine. A retired teacher from Knoxville who drove 4 hours because she said the article made her cry for the first time in 11 years. I had not expected any of this. Grace stepped to the small wooden podium we had built from reclaimed oak. She welcomed everyone, thanked the donors, and read the foundation's mission statement aloud. Her voice was steady, practiced, but when she mentioned Ruth's name, she paused, just long enough for the mountain wind to fill the silence. Then she looked at me. I walked to the podium with Ruth's wedding ring in my breast pocket and her voice recorder in my hand. The crowd was larger than I had imagined. I could feel their eyes, their patience, their kindness. I cleared my throat and pressed play. Ruth's voice filled the garden like sunlight fills a room you forgot had windows. "Henry," she said, "if you are hearing this, then the garden is no longer just mine. It belongs to everyone now. And that is exactly what I wanted." She paused. I could hear her breathing on the recording. Slow and measured. The way it sounded during her final autumn. I know what they did. I know what they tried to take. But I did not build this garden to fight them. I built it to outlast them. Every seed I planted was a promise. Every root was a prayer. And every bloom was proof that love does not die when the body does. Martha wiped her eyes. Elijah lowered his head. Marcus gripped the edge of a table so hard his knuckles turned pale. You spent 40 years worrying you were not enough for me. Ruth continued. That you worked too many hours. That you forgot too many anniversaries. That you should have been softer, louder, braver. But Henry, listen to me carefully. The wind stopped. Even the birds paused. You were enough. You were always enough. The way you held my hand in the hospital without saying a word. The way you watered my rosemary every single morning, even when you did not understand why it mattered. The way you stayed. I pressed my hand against my chest. The ring was warm through the fabric. So here is my last instruction, she said. Stop blaming yourself. Build something beautiful from what remains. Teach someone what I taught you. And when the lavender blooms again in spring, sit in the garden and know that I am still here. The recording ended. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the wind brushing through the new lavender beds along the walkway, carrying a scent so familiar it nearly broke me. I placed the recorder on the podium and looked out at the faces before me. Some I knew. Most I did not. My wife planted this garden 40 years ago, I said. My daughter-in-law sold it for a vacation. But my wife had already planned for that. She planned for everything. She hid a key, a trust, a camera, a recording, a ring, and a blueprint. She left behind a network of people who owed her nothing, but gave everything. I took a breath. Ruth always said that kindness is the only currency that appreciates over time. I did not understand that until I lost her. But now I do. I reached into my pocket and held the wedding ring up to the light. It caught the morning sun and threw a small circle of gold onto the podium. This ring was buried under her first rose bush. She wanted me to find it when I was ready. And I am ready now. I placed the ring on the podium beside the recorder. This foundation is not mine. It is not even Ruth's anymore. It belongs to every person who has ever lost something precious and been told to move on. You do not have to move on. You just have to keep planting. The crowd stood. Martha was the first to clap. Then Elijah. Then a woman I had never met, standing in the back row, holding a handkerchief to her face. Marcus walked to me and put his arms around my shoulders. He did not say anything. He did not need to. That evening, after the last guest had left, I walked to the old rose bush at the far corner of the garden. I knelt in the dirt and whispered into the soil. They sold your garden for a trip, Ruth. I turned it into a journey home. The lavender answered with its silence. And that was enough.